I'd seen desperate worlds before, but not like this. The message came as a shiver through the void, a coded distress beacon that any ship with ears could hear. Asterisk, help us, please. They're coming. Asterisk, the voice wasn't human. It had the trembling resonance of something fragile, something that had never known war. Even replaying it now, through the ship's old speakers, I could feel the weight of it pressing on my chest. I wasn't military, not anymore. I'd traded fatigues and front lines for clean uniforms and diplomatic titles, telling myself I was done with blood and battle. Now I was a liaison for the Terran Expansion Council, the kind of person they sent when humans wanted to show their better face to the galaxy. But as my shuttle cut through the storm-ridden skies of Aen'dorian, I knew this was no ceremonial visit. The clouds below swirled like bruises on the planet's skin, and the landing pads were silent, empty except for the shapes waiting for me. They stood in a cluster, willowy figures that barely seemed real, their translucent skin catching the weak sunlight and scattering it like glass. Aen'dorians. They looked like the memory of something beautiful, the kind of beings you'd see carved into ancient temples. Their eyes were wide and luminous, pools of liquid silver that trembled as they fixed on me. When I stepped out of the shuttle, the air was light, sweet, almost too clean. One of them stepped forward, hesitating before reaching for my sleeve, long fingers trembling as they made contact. "They will burn us," it whispered, its voice breaking like brittle leaves in the wind. "You are humans, yes? You fight." I didn't answer right away. There was something fragile in the way they stood, like a single harsh word might shatter them. My boots crunched on the pale stone of their landing platform as I took in the scene, spires rising like frozen waves, buildings grown rather than built, streets that curved like rivers instead of cutting like blades. It was a paradise, untouched by the ugliness of war. "Why us?" I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. The one who had spoken lowered its head, as if ashamed. "We sent messages. To many. The Vexor refused. The Chorus demanded tribute. Others did not reply. And humanity did," I said. A slight nod. "You answered." I studied them carefully, these beings who had reached into the void and found us. I wondered if they understood what it meant to call for humans, what it meant to invite Deathworlders to your door. I didn't tell them then, because even I didn't know if they were ready for the answer. The Aen'dorians led me from the landing platform into their city, if you could even call it that. It wasn't a city the way humans would build one. There were no roads of cracked asphalt, no towers of glass and steel clawing at the sky. Everything here seemed to have been coaxed from the earth itself. Tall crystal spires rose like frozen music, curving delicately toward one another, and the ground under my boots shifted from pale stone to something softer, a path of polished mineral that glowed faintly as we walked. The air smelled faintly of rain and wildflowers, as though the planet itself refused to acknowledge the shadow creeping toward it. "This is what they're coming for?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. My words felt clumsy here, heavy in a place so weightless. The elder walking beside me, if elder was even the right word, nodded. His face looked like carved ivory, smooth but lined with a kind of sorrow that didn't belong on something so delicate. "The Relk take what they want. Always. They will take this too." We passed under an arch grown from a single piece of crystal, and I could see them, more Aen'dorians, watching from a distance, their wide silver eyes following every step I took. They didn't speak, but I could feel their fear, sharp and brittle in the air. I thought of Earth then. Of cities rising from ashes, of deserts turned to glass and oceans poisoned and healed again. Humanity was shaped by catastrophe. We were born from storms and clawed our way through fire, molded into something harder because the world never gave us a choice. These beings, they'd never had to be hard. They'd never needed to. One of the younger ones approached, their voice trembling. "We have no defenses," they admitted, wringing long hands together. "We have no soldiers. We do not know how to fight." The elder touched my arm gently. "We sent messages across the stars. We begged the Vexor. They refused. We offered riches to the Chorus. They wanted more. Only you." His voice faltered, as if he didn't dare hope. "Only humans answered." I finished for him, my throat dry. I looked around at the glittering streets, the fountains that glowed from within, the air so clean it felt almost unreal. They had no idea what they had summoned, No idea what kind of people had answered their plea. Humans weren't diplomats in shining armor. We weren't saviors in silver ships. We were something else entirely. I didn't tell them what was coming. I didn't tell them that I'd sent a message of my own, one that would bring not envoys, but predators, the kind of humans the galaxy whispered about when they used the word Deathworld. They needed to see it for themselves. They arrived 3 days later. I heard them before I saw them, the deep, guttural roar of engines cutting through Aen'doria's pristine sky, a sound so raw and violent it seemed to split the calm in half. The Aen'dorians flinched at the noise, covering their ears, their fragile frames trembling as black shapes descended from the clouds. The dropships didn't glide. They punched their way down, brutal wedges of metal that looked nothing like the graceful crafts in Aen'dorian skies. I stood on the landing platform as the first ship hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud. Dust and shards of pale stone blasted outward, scattering across the polished surface. The Aen'dorians recoiled, some stumbling back into each other. To them, this must have looked like an invasion. The hatches dropped with a heavy clang, and they came out, humans, but not the kind I'd been sent here to represent. These weren't the polished envoys or council diplomats the Aen'dorians were expecting. These were Deathworlders. The first one through the hatch moved like a predator, boots striking the ground with the weight of someone who'd survived too many battles to count. She was tall, broad-shouldered, her dark hair tied back, scars cutting across her face like pale lightning. Vega. She wore armor that looked battered but unbreakable, plates patched and repatched, every dent a memory of violence survived. Her eyes scanned everything, the spires, the trembling locals, me, with a predator's focus. Behind her came more. A man with tattoos crawling up his neck, his rifle cradled like an extension of his own body. A woman with pale Siberian skin and a stare as cold as the tundra she'd been born to. A lean, sunburned Australian who carried a blade fashioned from what looked like an engine part. The Aen'dorians whispered among themselves, their voices shaking. These were not the saviors they had imagined. They had asked for protectors and received apex predators instead. Vega didn't bow, didn't soften her voice for their fragile ears. "Where are the hostiles?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to cut. The elder stammered, his thin hands twisting together. They will come soon. They always do." Vega's eyes flicked to me, a sharp, assessing look. "You didn't tell them." I held her gaze, my stomach tight. I thought they should see for themselves. For a long moment, no one moved. The Aen'dorians stood frozen, their breath quick and shallow, staring at the soldiers who didn't look like soldiers, humans who looked like the embodiment of every nightmare they'd never had. And then Vega broke the silence. "Good," she said, her mouth curving into something that might have been a smile, though it held no warmth. "They should know what they've called." That night, the Deathworlders made camp outside the city walls, on a ridge of pale stone overlooking the spires. It wasn't a base so much as a scar. They cut into the land the way only humans could. Tents snapped into place like they'd been rehearsed 1,000 times. Fires were built, not for warmth, but because humans never sat in the dark. The Aen'dorians watched from a distance, huddled in clusters, whispering like children staring at wolves through glass. I sat by one of those fires with Vega, the flicker of orange light dancing across her scarred face. She was cleaning her rifle methodically, like it was a ritual, the metal catching and reflecting every flame. Around us, her people moved like restless shadows, sharpening blades, checking ammo, joking in voices too loud for this quiet planet. "They're terrified of you," I said, watching an Aen'dorian flinch when someone laughed too harshly. Vega didn't look up. "Good. Fear's better than false hope." I stared into the fire for a moment, letting the smoke sting my eyes. "They've never seen war." "Not really. They think it's just ships and soldiers, like stories in the dark. They don't know what it costs." She snapped a piece of the rifle into place and gave me a glance sharp enough to pin me. "You didn't bring us here to comfort them." I didn't argue, because she was right. I'd called them. I'd sent the message knowing who would answer. A long silence stretched between us, filled with the distant hum of the city and the low murmur of soldiers trading stories. I found myself studying Vega's face in the firelight, not just the hard lines and scars, but the way her eyes softened for a heartbeat when she looked toward the city. "You ever wonder," I asked quietly, "if we're too much for them? That maybe we'll break what we're trying to save." Vega smirked, a flash of teeth that wasn't quite a smile. "That's the thing about humans. We break things. But sometimes, we build something better from the pieces." Her words hung heavy in the air. I didn't respond, because across the ridge, the night sky shuddered. Far on the horizon, a streak of light cut through the darkness, faint but unmistakable, the kind of light that doesn't belong to stars. Vega saw it too. She didn't flinch. She just slid the last piece of her rifle into place, the click sounding louder than it should have in the quiet. "Looks like they're coming," she said, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all her life. And maybe she had. The Relk came at dawn. The first warning wasn't the sight of their ships but the sound, an unnatural tearing of the sky, a metallic shriek that made the Aen'dorians clutch their ears and fall to their knees. Then the clouds split open, and the Relk ships fell like jagged black stones hurled by angry gods. They weren't graceful vessels like the Aen'dorian skimmers or even the functional warships humanity used. These were ugly, brutal things, all crooked spines and exposed machinery, built for terror before they were built for flight. The first ship slammed into the ground outside the city with a roar that sent cracks through the polished crystal streets. Hatches yawned open, and the Relk poured out. They were monsters in every sense, hulking creatures wrapped in plates of chitin, claws gleaming wetly in the rising sun. Their voices were a chorus of snarls and screeches, animal and mechanical at the same time. The Aen'dorians screamed. Vega didn't. "Positions!" she barked, and the Deathworlders moved like lightning. It was almost terrifying how fast the humans transformed. One moment they were crouched around their fires, half asleep, and the next they were a wall of steel and teeth, rifles snapping up, blades flashing in the pale light. The first wave of Relk charged, claws scraping against the stone, their weight shaking the ground. I saw an Aen'dorian stumble backward, eyes wide, unable to even think of running. They were too shocked, too alien to violence to know what to do. The Deathworlders didn't retreat. They advanced. Vega was first into the fray, her rifle roaring, each shot cracking through the air like a whip. A Relk beast dropped in mid-stride, its armored skull punched clean through. She didn't pause. She didn't even blink. To her left, a lean Australian with sun-scorched skin swung a blade that looked like it had been forged from a broken engine part. He cleaved through a Relk's leg, then spun the weapon and drove it into another's chest, a single smooth motion like he'd been born with the weapon in his hand. A Siberian woman slammed into a Relk twice her size, teeth gritted, grabbing the creature by its throat with gloved hands and lifting it off the ground before hurling it down so hard the stone cracked. The Relk weren't prepared for this. They'd come for prey, soft, fragile beings who would run and hide. They didn't expect predators who ran toward the fight. The Aen'dorian stared in silence, fear mixing with something new, something that looked dangerously like awe, as they watched humans wade through monsters like a storm. The Relk had no idea what the word Deathworlder meant. But they were about to learn. By the second day, the battlefield was unrecognizable. What had been soft, pale stone was now blackened with ash and smeared with the strange, iridescent blood of the Relk. Smoke hung in the air like a low ceiling, and every breath tasted of metal and grit. The once pristine horizon of Aen'dora was scarred with craters and shattered crystal spires, and still the Relk came. They didn't stop. Wave after wave crashed against the human line, relentless, confident that sheer numbers would drown these strange predators from Earth. But humans weren't made to drown. I watched from the ridge as the Deathworlders fought like the stories humanity pretended we'd outgrown. They didn't move like soldiers in neat formations. They moved like something older, wilder, like hunters driving back a beast with teeth bared. Vega stood at the center, her voice ragged from shouting orders but never breaking. "Left flank, push. Don't let them circle. You on the ridge. Take the shot or I will." Every word was steel, and the humans responded with the same unflinching ferocity. I glanced back toward the Aen'dorians. At first they had huddled in their shining halls, weeping, unable to look. Now, they were creeping closer to the edges of the battlefields, their trembling curiosity outweighing their fear. Their eyes, those wide pools of silver, weren't just frightened anymore. They were full of something stranger, something brighter. One young Aen'dorian stood beside me, their slender hands clutching the edge of the ridge. They spoke softly, voice quivering. "Why do your people do this? You could leave us. You could hide." The question lodged in my chest. I thought of Earth, the times we had been on the brink, the centuries of clawing back from disasters both natural and man-made. I thought of the cities that burned, the floods that drowned whole coasts, and the hands that reached for each other in the dark. Because, I said, my voice low, someone once saved us. And we learned. The Aen'dorian blinked, as if the words were more foreign to them than war itself. Behind us, another explosion rocked the ground, sending shards of shattered crystal into the air. Vega didn't even flinch. She yanked a blade from the chest of a dying Relk, her hands and armor streaked with dark blood, and barked another command. The Deathworlders were battered, their bodies marked by burns, cuts, and exhaustion. But they fought on with a kind of savage determination that no number of enemies could crush. The Relk had come expecting easy prey. Instead, they had found the apex predators of a death world, and nothing they threw seemed enough to stop them. The final push came on the third night. The sky turned the color of blood as the Relk unleashed everything they had left. Their largest ships blotted out the stars, their shadows stretching across the shattered landscape. The ground trembled with each impact as they dropped their fiercest warriors, beasts clad in armor so thick it gleamed like black stone in the firelight. The air was a storm of screams, smoke, and the hiss of plasma fire cutting through the night. The Aen'dorians huddled in what remained of their spires, whispering prayers to gods that had never prepared them for this. Some cried openly. Some simply stared, frozen, their silver eyes reflecting the chaos like mirrors. The humans didn't pray. I stood with Vega near the shattered ridge, the flickering glow of burning wreckage painting her face in harsh light. Her armor was dented, spattered with Relk blood. Her hands shook when she thought no one was looking, but her voice didn't waver. "Form up," she bellowed over the din. "This is it, one more push and they break." Around her, the Deathworlders gathered, every one of them bloodied, exhausted, and unyielding. Their movements were slower now, their breaths ragged, but their eyes burned with something fierce and undeniable. The Relk charged, and the ground quaked beneath their weight. The humans didn't wait. Vega led the charge, screaming a wordless battle cry that seemed to tear the night in half. The others followed, a tide of steel, fire, and fury slamming into the Relk line. There was nothing elegant about it, just raw, desperate violence. I saw a man swing a broken rifle like a club, smashing through the helmet of a Relk warrior. I saw a woman drop her last magazine, draw a knife, and hurl herself onto an enemy twice her size, stabbing until the creature stopped moving. I saw Vega, bleeding from her side, plant her boots in the churned stone and fire until her rifle clicked empty, then draw her sidearm and keep going. The battle wasn't clean. It wasn't pretty. But it was human. When the last Relk fell, the battlefield went eerily quiet. The smoke thinned, revealing the broken landscape, the bodies, the shattered ships. The Aen'dorians stepped out from their shelters slowly, as if afraid the silence might shatter. They looked at the humans, scarred, bloodied, some barely standing, and their wide eyes filled not with fear but something like reverence. The elder's voice trembled as he whispered, "You came from the dark, and brought the light." Vega, breathing hard, gave a tired, crooked smile. "No," she said, voice rough but steady. "We just brought the fight." And for the first time, the Aen'dorians understood what those words meant.